Hi, I'm Ashley Turner, and this is where the story snaps. Let's go back to that table, warm lights, cold intentions. Mom leaned in, each syllable honed to cut perfectly clean. Your success means nothing. Danielle is my gold, she said. The napkin bit my palm. Years of understudy tightened inside. I slid a debt total across the cloth, 45,000. Here, let your gold cover it, I said without shaking. Breath stalled. Dad's fork fell. I stood, not to bargain, to end. I grew up in the valley, where ceilings were called goals. The fridge was Danielle's museum. My wins lived in drawers. Mom's mantra never changed. She's my gold. I was background noise. At 9, I brought home a coding ribbon, bright as noon. Dad muttered, "Good job, kid," and returned to his emails. Mom waved me aside and framed Danielle's sketch like prophecy. My ribbon curled in a drawer. Birthdays showed the exchange rate for love versus spectacle. She got parties and cameras. I got a backpack. Quiet keeps houses calm. Quiet also buries daughters alive. At 12, I built a homework tracker on the family computer. Left it open. Came back to a blank screen. File gone. Bin empty. Danielle shrugged. Glitch. And laughed. I rebuilt overnight. Placed second. They arrived late. Missed my name. Lesson learned. Applause here was budgeted. That night, I opened a passworded doc and started counting. Not money. Moments. Quotes. Dates. Screenshots. Every erasure. School bent toward Danielle like chairs dragged to a throne. Teachers said her sister. Smiles dimming on contact. Friends borrowed notes, then called me weird for coding. After school, I fixed bugs at a coffee shop. Saved for a used Android I bought with my gigs. The same week, Mom surprised Danielle with a brand new iPhone. Gold needs the best tools, she said like scripture. Rumors came next, soft as gossip, cold as January. Anonymous notes. Too intense. Unreliable. Signed by no one. I traced an IP and didn't like the address. So I stopped asking to be seen and built exits. I treated love like a variable. Undefined, then optional, then null. When no one looked up, I saved the timestamp. By 14, I knew the family business. Invest in a myth. Keep the princess in velvet. Keep the mechanic in the dark. Every slight hardened into rungs I climbed without witnesses. I should have known that dinner wasn't a beginning. It was the invoice for years I'd already paid. And the balance was coming due. She wasn't done with me yet. State U in Los Angeles felt like oxygen after years underground. I rented a squeaky studio, stacked shifts, chased the dean's list. Days in class, nights in code. Breakfast was coffee and resolve. I learned to ship, not shimmer. Shipping kept the lights on. Internship came fast. Hollywood startup above a taco shop. I built scheduling, cleaned crashes, argued gently with bad design. When my feature shipped, I saved 3 seats for the launch. Mom, we'll try. Dad, liked. Danielle, a heart. The room filled with press badges and sparkling water. 3 empty chairs stared harder than any camera. 10 minutes to go. Danielle has a networking thing. I walked on stage anyway. Clapped by strangers, hollowed by family. Later, an email arrived, concerns about my reliability. I traced the IP, it circled home like a vulture. Danielle called it a joke. Mom, don't make it big. So I made it small. I made them smaller in me. I built walls the way I knew, one commit at a time. New alias, Jess Carter. New repo. Contracts no one tracked. Gigs became retainers. Retainers. A quiet pipeline. Dad called sometimes, volume low as a dying radio. Proud of you, kid. Then the pause. Then the drift. I stopped asking him to stay. Even echoes get tired. Spring, I pitched a remote learning app at work. Green light. I built the spine, masked my name in commits. Small licensing checks arrived like oxygen I didn't have to beg. I reinvested in courses, servers, and a tighter lock screen. Danielle pivoted from Prince to a subscription box. Mom floated loans like life preservers that never reached shore. I listened more than I spoke and archived what I heard. The archive kept me honest when the room tried to lie. Senior year, another email hit a client under my badge. Same fingerprints, same concerns, same address pretending to care. I didn't reply. I upgraded security and outworked rumor. Silence became armor. Output became argument. Under Jess, I invested in 2 competitors. I watched Danielle's store stall under borrowed code. A mutual asked if I'd mentor her. I didn't answer. Mom kept the crown polished. Danielle is my gold. I kept the ledger current. Dates, dollars, screenshots, silence. Not to hurt them, just to stop them hurting me. Money got real. Quiet zeros, no balloons, no posts. I should have felt safe. Instead, the air tightened. The bigger I got, the smaller their story fit. Something familiar circled Launchpad. I thought I had firewalls. Then came the breach. I had prepared for the world's indifference. What I wasn't prepared for was betrayal at the hands of family. It happened quietly. I was at my desk late one night, debugging a recent project for a client when I saw the alert pop up. Unauthorized login attempt. The IP address was familiar. Too familiar. I checked the logs. Danielle's IP. She'd tried hacking into my app's framework. She tried to steal my work. I wasn't surprised. Just numb. This was the inevitable result of years spent being invisible, waiting for them to see me. Now I knew they saw me. But they saw me as a threat, something to suppress. I confronted Danielle over the phone, my voice steady but my hands shaking. "You tried to hack my app, didn't you?" I asked. She laughed it off, the familiar smirk in her voice. "You're too serious, Ashley, it's just code." But it wasn't just code. It was mine. When I told Mom, expecting some kind of reckoning, she dismissed it. "Don't make a big deal out of it, Ashley. Danielle's just figuring things out. You know she's my gold." My gold. That phrase still stung. It wasn't just about a hacked app anymore. It was about everything I'd been to them. Invisible, undervalued, dismissed. It was about the years of favors I'd been asked to perform. It was about never being enough unless I was their backup. I stopped calling home, stopped caring about their opinions, stopped seeking validation. But more than that, I started locking away my achievements. I doubled down on my grind. Freelance work became a refuge, a secret I kept close. I created apps for small businesses, built websites for local shops, never telling a soul at home. The gap between me and them widened with every successful project. I started earning real money, more than I had ever imagined. But I kept it hidden, kept myself hidden. I wasn't just building my app, I was building my life away from their shadow. Danielle, meanwhile, spiraled. Her art store crashed, again. Her idea failed. Her dreams crumbled in front of her, just as I'd always predicted. But Mom and Dad, they kept pouring money into her, kept pretending she was gold, even as her failures piled up. I did what I always did. I watched. But I didn't help. My success? That was mine to own. I thought I'd learned everything I needed to know. Then came the final betrayal. They picked the same dining room that erased me for years. Faded curtains, chipped plates. Danielle's art still framed like commandments. Mom opened with sugar, then switched to steel in one breath. "Family helps family. Danielle is my gold. We need you." Dad cleared his throat, eyes glued to the table's water rings. "We're behind. 45,000. The bank is calling." Danielle sat rigid, lipstick brave, voice suddenly very small. "I'll work for you. I'll do anything. Just help." I laid my folder down like a surgeon setting sharp instruments. Dates, loans, screenshots, IP traces, the hack attempts, the emails. I slid a printout across, balance due, their signatures in black. "Here, take my mother's gold and pay it." The room stopped breathing. Dad's fork clattered like a verdict. Mom blinked hard, hunting for the script that always saved her. "Ashley, you're cruel." The word trembled, accused, begged, rewrote history. "No," I said, voice level, "I'm finally accurate." "You invested in a myth and called it love," I continued. "You leveraged the house to float her failures, then praised vision. To cover that, she hacked me and smeared my name. Return on family? Negative 45,000 and counting." Mom reached for my hand like a closing trap. "We'll pay you back. You know Danielle's meant for greatness." I pulled away. "Greatness doesn't need a cosigner every season." Dad tried a softer tone. "Kid, be reasonable." "I am," I said and set my terms on paper. No loans, no keys, no access to my code. No using my name for credit, contracts, or sympathy. Public apology for years you renamed neglect as parenting. Danielle's mask cracked. Fury leaked through the seams. "You're jealous. You always wanted my spotlight." I almost laughed. "I built a lighthouse. You built fog." Mom gasped like truth was impolite at her own table. I stood, pushed back my chair, and let wood complain. "You chose your gold. You can pawn it or polish it. But you don't get to melt me down to pay for it." Silence held, heavy as debt, exact as math. At the door, Dad tried once more, gentle, tired, late. "We're still your parents." I nodded. "And I'm still your daughter. Which is why I'm done being your collateral." I left the invoice on the runner like a headstone. Outside, the valley air felt cleaner than it had in years. Some doors slam. Mine locked with a code only I knew. The fallout didn't arrive as a crash. It arrived as proof. The fallout didn't explode. It accumulated, paper by paper, fact by fact. A bank notice, a past due stamp, a voicemail that never apologized. Danielle's feed went quiet. The crown finally weighed more than praise. Mom texted a paragraph, then another, none containing the word sorry. Dad called at dusk, voice small, older than I remembered. I should have said something sooner. I let the silence answer him. Some debts aren't money. Some refunds are distance, sleep, and sunlight. I moved through my loft like someone had widened the hallways. Coffee tasted like choices. Code read cleaner. Breathing arrived without permission. I took my evidence folder, labeled it closed, and put it away. Not revenge. Record keeping. The past is quieter when it's documented. I didn't buy them out. I didn't buy belonging. I bought a second monitor and a sturdier boundary instead. I funded a Girls in Code scholarship under a name they'd never notice. I mentored 2 interns who remind me of basement version me. At night, I sit by the window above the strip. Cars braid light. I count wins without asking who's allowed. I practice a new language where love isn't measured in invoices, where family is a verb, or it isn't family at all. Do I miss them? Sometimes. Grief knocks with familiar knuckles. I answer with truth. I left to survive, not to spite. Forgiveness for me is a locked door and a soft lamp. Compassion for me is funding futures that don't erase anyone's name. If you're listening with a knot in your throat, untie it. You don't owe endless proof to people invested in your doubt. Walk toward the life that keeps your name whole and spoken. Build receipts. Build boundaries. Build the room you were denied. Have you faced favoritism you couldn't fix from the inside? Tell me in the comments, what did choosing yourself look like? If you've been through this, you're not alone. Not ever. Subscribe for more true stories. And share this with someone rebuilding. I locked my door that night, then opened every window. The air smelled like code and lemons and something brand new. Queens don't beg for crowns. We build the platform and stand.
The chapel smelled faintly of lilies, their sweetness clashing with the hollow ache in my chest. I stood beside Marcus's casket, fingers brushing the polished wood, searching for warmth that was no longer there. Friends from Asheville and co-workers who had admired his craftsmanship came to pay respects, their hands gripping mine, their words fragments I could barely hold on to. Through the blur of embraces and murmured prayers, I saw my father. Raymond stood apart, shoulders squared, face carved from stone. He offered no comfort, no gentle word. When our eyes met, his nod was curt, a gesture of obligation rather than grief. He had never approved of Marcus, and today was no different. The pastor's voice rose, filling the chapel with stories of Marcus's generosity, his laughter, the home he built with his own hands. I wanted to sink into those words, to remember him not in death but in the life he poured into every beam and nail. My Aunt Marta rested a hand on my back, steadying me when my knees threatened to give. After the service, outside in the cold mountain air, I watched mourners drift away in small groups. My father lingered near the church steps, his voice low but sharp enough for me to hear. Marcus never should have claimed that land. It's Callaway property, built his fancy house like it was his to give. I froze, breath caught in my throat, even in death. Marcus was not spared my father's bitterness. Marta's eyes flickered to mine. A warning. But I said nothing. The moment was not for battles. I walked to the car, the weight of my father's words pressing against the grief already splitting me open, knowing they were only the beginning. When my father's words echoed in my mind, I turned to memory, to the place Marcus and I had built together. The house wasn't just lumber and stone on a patch of Carolina soil, it was his devotion made solid. I still see him at the drafting table, sleeves rolled up, pencil behind his ear. He would sketch until midnight, adjusting lines, measuring again, always asking how I moved through a room. The counters should be a little lower, he said once, tapping the page. You shouldn't need a step stool to reach the top shelf. I laughed, teasing him for fussing over inches. but secretly I loved the way he noticed details most people overlooked. For Marta, he designed wide doorways and a gentle ramp leading to the porch so she could come without feeling like a burden. He even planned a smaller kitchenette for her at the back of the house, where she could brew tea without asking. "Everyone deserves independence," he told me, his voice quiet but firm. We chose beams of reclaimed Carolina pine from an old barn outside Hendersonville. Marcus said wood with a past carried strength. I remember the day the beams arrived, their grain deep and weathered, and how he lifted one to his shoulder like it weighed nothing, grinning at me as if to say, "This is for us." Every choice-mattered cypress floors warm under bare feet, windows that caught the Blue Ridge morning light, a porch wide enough for rocking chairs and long conversations. It wasn't grandeur, it was sanctuary. And more than that, it was a declaration. With each nail Marcus hammered, he pushed back against my father's shadow, proving we could build a life without his grip. The house was not just walls, but proof of freedom, even now. I can almost hear Marcus whispering as he locked the front door for the first time. "This is ours. Elowen. No one can take it from you." But as I stood in the quiet after the funeral, my father's mutter still in my ears, I felt the first cracks of doubt pressing against that promise. My father liked to remind me that he raised me alone, as though the fact gave him permanent rights over my life. When my mother died in a car accident, I was only 12, lost in grief and confusion. He stepped in with rules instead of comfort, structure instead of softness. At first, I mistook it for strength. Only later did I realize it was control disguised as care. Every decision had to pass through him. If I wanted to join a school trip, he questioned the cost. If I talked about college, he dismissed it as unnecessary, telling me I'd be better off working in his shop. Even after I became a hospice administrator, a role that gave me purpose, he belittled it. "You push papers," he scoffed. "Not real work. You'll never make money that way." The truth was, money had always been his wound. When I was in college, he poured most of his savings into an auto parts franchise, convinced it would make him wealthy. The business folded within 2 years, leaving him with debts and a bitterness that seeped into everything. From then on, he eyed my stability with envy, as if my modest salary and careful savings had been stolen from him. Marcus only made things worse in his eyes. My father called him a dreamer, sneering at the house plans he drafted on the kitchen table. "Fairy tales," he muttered. "You can't build a future with pencils and good intentions." But Marcus proved him wrong with every beam he raised, with every corner of that house that stood strong against the mountain wind. Still, Raymond never let go of the idea that what I had was somehow owed to him. He carried his failures like a badge, expecting me to shoulder them too, and standing at Marcus's funeral, hearing him mutter about the land, I understood that his resentment hadn't faded, it had only sharpened with time, waiting for a moment to strike. By the time Marta and I pulled into the driveway, the sky above the Blue Ridge was already dimming, streaked with the last light of day. My body ached with the weight of grief and ceremony, every step slower than the last. All I wanted was silence, the kind that comes when walls know your sorrow and keep it safe. But as I stepped out of the car, I noticed a glow spilling through the curtains. A lamp was on in the living room. My breath caught. Marta frowned, wheeling closer to me on the gravel. "Did you leave something running?" she asked. I shook my head. I had checked every switch before the service. The front door gave under my hand. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cologne I recognized too well. My father sat in Marcus's chair, one leg crossed, his suitcase leaning against the wall. The television hummed in the background, half a sports broadcast, half static. It was as if he had lived there for years. He didn't rise when I entered. He simply glanced at me, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You're late," he said. "I've already moved your belongings to a small house out in the countryside. This place is mine now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Marta gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But I stood rooted. My father's words cut with the same coldness he'd wielded all my life. Yet underneath them I heard desperation. He was staking a claim on the one thing he thought I couldn't live without. And then, without meaning to, I laughed. It wasn't loud, not even sharp, just a quiet sound, low and steady. His eyes narrowed, unsettled, as if I knew something he did not. In truth, I did. Marcus had made sure of it. I crossed the room, brushing my hand across the beam Marcus had installed with such care. "This house," I said softly, "will never belong to you." My father stiffened, but I turned away before his reply could sting. Inside, I could already feel Marcus's foresight stirring to life, and I knew this battle would not play out the way my father expected. I found him still in the living room after Marta had gone to bed, his suitcase half open, shirts spilling onto the floor as if to declare his arrival permanent. I wanted to avoid the fight, to hold my grief close and untouched, but my father had never been a man to leave silence alone. "You should thank me," he began, voice steady in that dangerous way it always was when he thought himself reasonable. "I'm stepping in to make sure this place doesn't go to waste. A woman alone can't manage something like this. You'll see soon enough." I folded my arms, my body trembling not from fear, but from the rising anger I could no longer swallow. "This is my home. Dad, Marcus and I built it together." He scoffed. "Your home. Don't make me laugh. This land has been in the Callaway line for generations. My grandfather worked this soil. It belongs to me, and by extension, to you, but only if I allow it. As head of the family, I decide." The words struck like an echo of my childhood. Every curfew, every restriction, every reminder that my life was never my own, but I wasn't 12 anymore, and Marcus had freed me from that weight the day he pressed the deed into my hands. "You're lying," I said evenly. "Marcus purchased this lot outright. The deed is in my name. You know it, even if you won't admit it." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease. "Still," he pressed on, "you wouldn't have any of this if not for me. Don't forget who fed you, clothed you, kept you alive when your mother was gone. You owe me." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "What I owe you is the truth this home was built on Marcus's vision, not your debts, and it will never carry your name." The room went still. His face flushed, and his hand gripped the arm of Marcus's chair so tightly the veins stood out. Then he shoved himself up, snatched his suitcase, and spat. "We'll see about that. You think you're clever, but I'll prove you wrong." The door slammed behind him, the echo rattling through the beams Marcus had chosen with care. I stood in the silence he left behind, heart pounding, knowing he wouldn't let the matter rest and that his next move would cut deeper. Sleep was impossible after my father stormed out. I lay awake, staring at the beams above my bed, tracing their dark lines until memory overtook me. Marcus's voice returned, calm and certain, as if he had known this moment would come. It had been 3 years earlier, on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. My father had stopped by uninvited, standing in the half-finished kitchen with his arms crossed, calling Marcus's plans a waste of time. He said no house could last when it was built on sentiment, and that one day I'd come crawling back to him when everything fell apart. Marcus hadn't argued, but I'd seen the look in his eyes, quiet calculation, the same look he wore when measuring lumber before a cut. That night, after my father left, Marcus took my hand and said, "We need to see someone, not because I doubt us, but because I know him." Within a week, he had arranged a meeting with a lawyer in town. I remembered sitting in that office, the smell of paper and ink filling the air while Marcus asked precise questions about deeds, trusts, and inheritance. He didn't raise his voice, didn't speak of my father by name, but every word was meant to guard me from the shadow I had grown under. The lawyer explained the process carefully. The deed would be placed solely in my name. A living trust would secure the property against any outside claims. It was meticulous, airtight. At the time, I thought Marcus was being overly cautious. He only smiled, saying, "It's not caution, Elowen. It's love." Now, lying in the stillness of the house he built, I felt the weight of his foresight. Marcus hadn't just left me a roof and walls. He left me protection, a fortress crafted out of trust and paperwork as much as pine beams and cypress floors. Tears slid quietly down my face, not from sorrow this time, but from the fierce gratitude of knowing he had seen the battle long before I did. Even in death, he had stood between me and my father, leaving me not only a home, but the dignity of keeping it. The summons arrived 2 weeks later, crisp paper folded in a way that carried my father's fingerprints without his touch. He had filed a legal claim, asserting the land beneath my house was Calloway property, passed through generations, and unlawfully taken by Marcus. For a moment, the weight of it pressed against my chest, but then I remembered Marcus's voice in that lawyer's office, steady as stone. It's airtight, Elowen. At the courthouse in Asheville, I sat beside my attorney, a woman named Clara Jensen, whose calm presence steadied me. My father stood across the room, shoulders square, lips pressed thin, as if he were a man cheated out of a rightful inheritance. He spoke of his grandfather, of family soil tilled with Calloway hands, of entitlement rooted deeper than deeds. Clara let him finish before opening a folder thick with records. "Your Honor," she began, sliding papers across the bench. "The lot in question was purchased by Marcus Price from Samuel Littleton, a private seller, 15 years ago. The deed is clear. No Calloway ownership has ever been recorded." The judge examined the documents, nodding once. My father's jaw twitched. Still, he tried again, claiming Marcus only used his name while intending to keep the property in the family. That was when Clara produced the trust papers. Heavy, stamped, and unshakable. They confirmed what Marcus had arranged. The property was secured solely in my name, protected against any outside claim. I watched the color drain from my father's face, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He had come to strip me of my home, but the foundation Marcus laid wood, stone, and law alike held firm. When the session adjourned, my father brushed past me without a word, his silence louder than all his threats. I knew then that the fight wasn't over, only that his defeat had cut him deeper than he could bear to show. In the weeks that followed the hearing, whispers traveled faster than mountain wind. Asheville wasn't a big city, and news of my father's failed claims spread through church pews, barber shops, and diner counters. Everywhere I went, eyes followed me, not with pity this time, but with something closer to quiet recognition. People had seen Raymond Calloway for what he was, and they no longer looked away. Old stories began to resurface. A mechanic he'd owed money to years back spoke of unpaid bills. An old neighbor recalled the poker games that ended with slammed doors and debts never settled. Even the failed auto parts franchise was spoken of again, the way he had convinced friends to invest and left them empty-handed. His image, once guarded by bluster, cracked under the weight of truth. For me, the gossip was background noise. The real weight sat heavy on my chest until one afternoon I drove out to the cemetery on the edge of town. The ground was soft from spring rain, the air smelling faintly of pine. I knelt by my mother's grave, tracing her name with my fingers as I used to do when I was younger and desperate for answers. "Mom," I whispered. He tried to take it all again. But Marcus, Marcus made sure he couldn't. The words trembled, not from fear, but from release. I thought of the generations of Callaways before me, men who held power through control, through taking instead of giving. My father was only the latest link in that chain. But as I stood there, the stone cool beneath my hand, I felt the certainty rise inside me. The cycle ended here. I would not pass down bitterness disguised as duty. Whatever future I carved would be mine, free of his shadow. And with that vow settled deep in my chest, I turned back toward town, ready to make a choice Marcus had once hinted at. But I had resisted until now. The house grew quiet after the trial, but the silence was no longer comforting. Every room echoed with my father's intrusion. His shadow pressed into the corners like a stain I couldn't scrub away. Even Marcus's touch, strong in the beams and floors, felt tangled with memories of my father's demands. I realized then that the home we built for freedom had been claimed by grief and conflict. So I made the hardest choice. I listed the house for sale. The process moved faster than I expected. Young buyers drawn to the mountain views and the wide porches Marcus had designed with such care. Signing the papers felt like closing a door on more than wood and stone. It was closing a chapter I no longer needed to carry. With the proceeds, along with Marcus's life insurance, I bought a restored brick condo in downtown Asheville, overlooking the French Broad River. The building was old but solid, with tall windows that filled the rooms with light. It wasn't the dream house Marcus had built, but it was a place untouched by my father's bitterness, a place that could be mine alone. Before leaving, I salvaged 2 of the pine beams Marcus had lifted onto his shoulder the day they were delivered. I had them cut, sanded, and shaped into a bookshelf. When it was finished, I ran my hand along the smooth grain and felt as if Marcus's strength still lived inside the wood. The bookshelf stood in my new living room, filled with photo albums, cookbooks, and Marta's favorite novels. It reminded me that leaving the house didn't mean leaving Marcus behind. It meant carrying the best of him into a life where my father's shadow could not follow. Word of my father's failed claim lingered longer than he did. Neighbors who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid his glare. Men he had played cards with at the VFW whispered about his debts, shaking their heads at the pride that had undone him. His phone calls stopped, his visits ceased, and eventually his name was spoken only as a caution, not as kin. From my balcony downtown, I watched the French Broad shimmer in the afternoon sun, the water moving steady and sure. Life had slowed into a rhythm I hadn't known in years, coffee with Marta in the mornings, long walks through the historic district, evenings reading by the bookshelf Marcus had left me in spirit. The condo didn't carry his handprints on every beam, but it carried his foresight, his care, his refusal to let my father's shadow win. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at the door, expecting a knock, a demand, another intrusion, but none came. Marcus had secured our home, and with it, my dignity. My father's power had always been built on fear and guilt, and when those crumbled, there was nothing left but the hollow echo of his voice in rooms he would never enter again. On the balcony, I planted a dogwood tree in a large clay pot, its branches thin and fragile at first. It was native to these mountains, a tree that bent with storms but bloomed brighter each spring. As the first blossoms opened, pale and soft against the brick, I felt something settle inside me, a peace that was mine, unclaimed and unbroken. This house was never his to claim it was always ours, built on love, not control. The air at the cemetery still clung to me as I drove back through the winding streets of Asheville. The quiet service had left me hollow, just a handful of neighbors, a few veterans from Dad's old unit, and Aunt Ruth standing close enough for me to feel her steady presence. When the final shovel of earth fell, it was as if a door had closed forever. I carried that silence with me, heavier than any weight I'd known. The house loomed at the end of the road, its white siding weathered but familiar. Every inch of it had been my anchor since childhood, a place where Dad's voice filled the rooms with discipline and kindness in equal measure. I expected emptiness when I turned the key, a cold echo of what once was. Instead, the sound of a television hummed through the walls. I stepped inside, my breath catching. The hallway smelled faintly of takeout, not the polish and cedar Dad always kept. In the living room, Marcus sat sprawled in Dad's old recliner, his duffel bags piled near the fireplace like he'd been there for days. He didn't look up right away, just smirked when he finally did, as if he'd been waiting. "This house is mine now," he said flatly, his tone rehearsed. "Dad promised it to me. I've already sold your things, so you should probably pack whatever's left and go." The words struck harder than the graveside silence. I couldn't breathe, couldn't even summon anger, only the sharp sting of betrayal layered over grief. The furniture, my books, Mom's quilts, Dad's medals, how could he? I gripped the door frame, my voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. "You had no right." Marcus leaned forward, eyes glinting with something between triumph and desperation. "Rights don't matter. Corinne, possession does." The house seemed to tilt under me, the walls pressing closer, every memory of my father colliding with this intrusion. I stood frozen, unable to look away from my brother, already knowing this was only the beginning of the fight he was determined to start. And as I faced him, I felt the past stir, dragging me back to the shadows of our childhood. I couldn't stop staring at Marcus, sitting there like he owned the air I breathed. But behind his smug face, another image rose up, the two of us as children in this same living room, the carpet rough under our knees, the sound of Dad's boots on the porch warning us to behave. Dad had a way of filling the house with his presence, firm but steady. He believed in work, in earning your keep. Every Saturday morning he'd march us into the yard with a rake or a bucket, telling us, "A house stays alive when its people care for it." I took those words to heart. Marcus didn't. He'd slip away, pretending to help, only to be caught sneaking off to his friends. Dad would shake his head, but somehow Marcus always got away with less. When Mom died, I was barely 12. The silence after her funeral nearly broke me, but I forced myself to step into the space she left behind. I cooked what little I knew, made sure Dad's uniforms were pressed, tried to keep the laundry folded. Marcus, 3 years older, disappeared more often basketball courts, late-night drives with friends. Responsibility never sat on his shoulders. It sat on mine. The house became my refuge, even when it felt like a burden. I learned the creak of every floorboard, the way the walls held warmth in winter, the smell of cedar from Dad's workbench drifting into my room. It was where I grew into myself, quietly, with sacrifice stitched into my bones. Marcus never let me forget it. He'd sneer, Dad's little shadow, as if caring was something to be ashamed of. He wanted freedom, while I carried duty. Now, watching him sprawl in the chair our father polished every Sunday, I wondered whose legacy this house really carried, his hollow demands, or the years I spent giving everything I had. And in that moment, I knew Marcus wasn't finished twisting the past to claim the future. I forced myself to step farther into the room, even as every instinct told me to turn and leave. "What right do you have?" Marcus, I asked, my voice low but sharp. "This is our family home. You don't get to just move in and decide it's yours." He leaned back in Dad's recliner like a king on a throne, crossing his arms. "Dad told me," he said with deliberate calm. He said the eldest son takes responsibility. It's tradition. This house was always meant for me. The words cut, not because they were true, but because I knew exactly what he was doing, spinning a story, turning half-truths into claims. Dad believed in responsibility. Yes, but he never confused it with entitlement. Marcus went on, smirking. I've already called a couple of buyers about the furniture. Some of it's antique, worth more than you'd think. No point letting it sit here collecting dust. My stomach dropped. The thought of strangers pawing through the oak table Dad built by hand, or the quilts Mom sewed in the months before she got sick, made me feel sick. "You sold our things," I whispered. "Our things." He shot back. "No. Corinne. They're mine now. You should be grateful I'm letting you take a few boxes." His arrogance was like a fog pressing in on me. I wanted to scream. But instead, my mind reached back to Dad's words during one of our last evenings together. He'd been tired that night, resting in his chair, eyes already clouded with illness. One day, he had said, "You'll need to look after yourself. Check the papers when the time comes. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." At the time, I hadn't understood what he meant. Now, staring at Marcus, I felt the pieces shifting into place. My brother was trying to rewrite history, but maybe Dad had left behind the truth. And if he had, I would have to find it before Marcus destroyed everything that mattered. Marcus's smirk hardened into something uglier, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You were Dad's pet, Corinne. But don't fool yourself. He never respected you. He pitied you. You clung to him because you had nothing else." The words burned, but I held my ground. I was here. Marcus. I stayed when Mom died. I stayed when Dad's health started slipping. "Where were you?" He leaned forward, eyes flashing. "I was living my life, not playing housemaid. You think folding laundry and hanging on his every word makes you noble? It just made you pathetic." His venom stung because it rewrote the years I had poured into keeping this family intact. But beneath his rage, I saw something else flickering fear. Later that evening, Aunt Ruth pulled me aside in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she set down her teacup. "He's been coming to me for months," she whispered, "asking for money, promises of paying it back, but it never came." I told him no. She sighed, lowering her voice. "Neighbors talk, Corinne, cards, gambling, one bad deal after another. He's in over his head." I closed my eyes, the pieces snapping together. His obsession with the house, the sudden urgency, the arrogance masking desperation, it all made sense now. He didn't want the house because it was Dad's legacy. He needed it, like a drowning man grasping at anything within reach. When I returned to the living room, Marcus was pacing, muttering about buyers and quick cash. He looked less like a man claiming his inheritance and more like someone clutching at survival. I felt something shift inside me then. This wasn't about honor or tradition. It was about my brother's ruin, and the house was his last lifeline. And I knew that if Dad had left me the truth, it was the only thing standing between Marcus's desperation and the life I had fought so hard to preserve. That night, I couldn't sleep. Marcus's words replayed in my mind like a bitter refrain, but louder still was the echo of my father's voice. I remembered him in his chair, hands weathered, voice soft but firm. "Check the cedar chest when the time is right." At the time, I thought he meant old photos or family keepsakes, but now I understood. He'd been pointing me toward something more. I rose before dawn, padding down the hallway to his study. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar polish, a scent that felt like him. Papers were still stacked neatly on the desk, unpaid bills mixed with veterans' newsletters. I searched drawers, rifled through folders, but nothing explained what he meant. My frustration grew until my eyes landed on the cedar chest against the wall, the one that had sat there since childhood. I lifted the lid. Old blankets, yellowed letters, and a box of medals lay inside. I sifted through them carefully, but still nothing. Desperation gnawed at me. Maybe I had misunderstood him after all. I pressed my hand against the bottom, and something shifted. The panel was loose. With trembling fingers, I pried it up, revealing a narrow compartment. Tucked inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's steady script. My breath caught as I tore it open. The first paper I unfolded was the deed to the house. Notarized and clear ownership transferred to Corinne Callahan. My name, in black ink, standing against every lie Marcus had thrown at me. Behind it was a letter, written in Dad's careful handwriting. Corinne, this home is yours because you cared for me when no one else would. Let it protect you now, the way you protected me. Do not let guilt or fear take what is rightfully yours. Stand steady. Love. Dad. The tears came hot and unrelenting, smudging the ink at the edges. For years, I had wondered if Dad truly saw the sacrifices I made, or if they faded into the background of duty. Now I knew he had seen it all. I pressed the papers to my chest, the weight of his trust settling into me. And with dawn rising outside the window, I knew the time had come to face Marcus with the truth. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds when I finally gathered the courage to face Marcus. My hands shook as I carried the envelope into the living room where he sat sprawled across the couch. Shoes kicked off, the remote in his hand as if he already owned everything within these walls. Without a word, I placed the deed on the coffee table between us. His eyes flicked down, then up at me, unreadable for a heartbeat before his mouth twisted into a bitter laugh. This. He lifted the papers like they were scraps of junk mail. You expect me to believe this. Please, Corinne, this is forged. You probably had some notary friend of yours whip this up after Dad died. The accusation hit hard, but I forced myself not to flinch. Dad signed this months ago. It's real. Marcus, the house is mine. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. Then I'll see you in court. You think a judge won't take my side, eldest son. Rightful heir. Family tradition, I'll bury you in legal fees until you hand me the keys. Before I could respond, Aunt Ruth appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. She stepped into the room and laid a firm hand on the back of the chair. Marcus Callahan, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. You need to stop this charade. Everyone in town knows the mess you've made of your life. The debts, the gambling, the begging. You've burned every bridge you had. And now you want to drag your sister down with you. Marcus's face reddened. Stay out of this, Ruth. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when you disgrace the family name. She shot back. I felt my pulse steady, the fear in my chest shifting into something firmer. I looked Marcus in the eye. Dad chose me because he trusted me. You chose yourself every time. That's the difference. For a moment, he seemed ready to strike, his jaw clenched, hands curling into fists. Then, with a furious growl, he shoved the papers back onto the table and stormed toward the door. The slam echoed through the house, leaving behind silence heavy with warning. His footsteps might have faded, but the storm he carried wasn't gone. It was only waiting for its chance to return. It didn't take long for Marcus to strike back. A week after our confrontation, a courier arrived at my door with an envelope stamped from a law office in town. Inside were copies of 2 so-called letters my father had supposedly written, both naming Marcus as the rightful heir to the house. The handwriting was clumsy, the dates inconsistent, and the language so unlike Dad's plain-spoken style that my stomach turned just reading them. I brought the documents to the attorney who had notarized the deed. He barely skimmed them before shaking his head. Fraudulent, he said firmly. No court would accept this. If your brother pushes it further, he'll be the one facing charges. Relief washed through me, but it was short-lived. The more Marcus flailed, the more dangerous his desperation became. Soon after, whispers trickled through town. Neighbors mentioned seeing men in dark cars parked outside Marcus's rented apartment. Others muttered about loan sharks and unpaid debts piling higher than he could climb. The grocery clerk told me Marcus had tried to put groceries on a closed account. At the diner, I overheard a conversation about him bragging of big deals that never materialized. His mask of control was slipping in front of everyone. Walking through town, I felt eyes glance at me with pity. Not for me exactly, but for what Marcus had become. I remembered him as a boy, running down these same sidewalks with laughter spilling behind him, a ball under his arm. Now people only spoke of his gambling, the money he owed, the promises he never kept. Watching from the distance of my own porch, I understood this wasn't just cruelty anymore. Marcus was collapsing, dragged under by the weight of choices he had made again and again. And though I carried the proof of Dad's trust in my hands, I carried something heavier in my heart, the knowledge that my brother's fall was inevitable, and it had nothing to do with me. The question was how far he would sink before he finally broke. After weeks of watching Marcus unravel, I needed quiet. The house had been heavy with his shadow, every corner haunted by our clash. But that evening I forced myself to walk through its rooms again. Sunlight filtered through the windows, catching dust motes in the air, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, I felt something gentler than grief. I lingered in the kitchen, running my hand across the oak table Dad had built. Memories rose unbidden him, sanding the wood late into the night, telling me, a home is made in the details. Corinne. Each room seemed to breathe with his lessons, but it was the workshop at the back of the house that pulled me in. The air smelled faintly of sawdust, though the tools were neatly arranged just as he'd left them. In the corner, I noticed a small wooden box, its lid carved with simple lines. I hadn't seen it before. Kneeling, I opened it with careful hands. Inside lay one of his service medals, still gleaming, and a folded note in his handwriting. Corinne's strength isn't in force, but in holding steady when others lose themselves. Build your peace here. My chest tightened as I read the words again and again, tears slipping down my face. For months, I had been bracing against Marcus, against whispers and threats, trying to prove myself strong. But Dad had known the truth all along. Strength wasn't about fighting louder. It was about refusing to be moved when storms raged around me. I pressed the metal into my palm, feeling the cool metal warm against my skin. The house was more than walls and deeds. It was a living message, built from his faith in me. I closed the box, steadied my breath, and rose. Somewhere outside, the world waited for Marcus's next strike, but inside these walls, I finally felt ready to face it. It didn't take long for Marcus's facade to crumble completely. One by one, the people he owed began knocking on his door, first polite, then insistent, and finally threatening. He stopped answering his phone, stopped showing his face in town, but the whispers followed him everywhere. The same neighbors who once tolerated his arrogance now crossed the street to avoid him. Even the bank moved swiftly, seizing what little he had left. When he finally came to me, it was not with the swagger I'd grown used to, but with a hollow look in his eyes. He stood on my porch, unshaven and trembling, his voice swinging between fury and desperation. "You have to help me, Corinne. Just a few thousand. I'll pay it back. You owe me that much." I said nothing. The silence stretched until his voice broke. He cursed me then, spitting venom about how I'd stolen everything from him, then collapsed into tears, begging like a child. Still, I held my silence. Aunt Ruth sat with me afterward, her hand covering mine. "You can't save someone determined to drown," she said softly. Her words lodged in me like a truth I'd known all along but never wanted to face. Within a week, Marcus was gone. No one knew where, maybe another town, maybe nowhere at all. All he left behind were unpaid debts, broken trust, and the echo of the boy he once had been, lost long before I ever realized it. For the first time in months, the house felt still, as if it too had released a long, weary breath. And as I looked around the rooms that held my father's legacy, I understood it was time to reclaim not just the house, but my life within it. The seasons shifted before I felt steady enough to begin again. Winter's heaviness gave way to the first warmth of spring, and with it, I turned my attention to the house. Slowly, I began filling its rooms not with the silence Marcus left behind, but with pieces of the life I wanted to build. I pulled out the quilts my mother had sewn years ago, their colors faded but their warmth intact, and draped them across the beds. In the workshop, I polished Dad's tools, setting them in place as if he might step in any moment to use them again. One afternoon, I dug a hole in the yard and planted a magnolia tree, its slender branches reaching upward with quiet promise. As I pressed the soil around its roots, I thought of Dad's words about strength, how it wasn't about force but holding steady when others lost themselves. This tree would be my reminder, growing season after season, no matter what storms came. Standing on the porch, I let the view settle into me. My brother wanted walls, I whispered, but my father left me roots. The truth of it felt like a weight lifted. In the weeks that followed, I opened the doors to others. Neighbors stopped by for coffee. Aunt Ruth brought pies, and children played in the yard where Marcus once sneered. The house became what Dad always intended, not a fortress to be hoarded, but a space for life and kindness to thrive. Justice had never been about punishing Marcus. It was about honoring my father by protecting what mattered most. And as laughter drifted through the rooms, I knew this was the true inheritance he had left me.